The screen fades in on a dusty roadside, the kind of place where life and death brush past each other without ceremony. There, barely visible against the scorched earth, lies a small body, so still it could be mistaken for discarded fabric. But then, something moves, just barely. A shallow breath, a flutter of life hanging by the thinnest thread. Most people would drive past without a second glance. But on this particular afternoon, after a driving lesson that should have been ordinary, one person didn't. And that split-second decision, the choice to stop, to look closer, to care, would set in motion a story of survival that seems almost impossible. This is the story of many. But here's what nobody could have predicted. The fragile creature dying on that roadside wasn't just fighting for its life. It was about to reveal something that would challenge everything its rescuer thought they knew about resilience, about fate, and about the mysterious forces that bring two souls together at exactly the right moment. The heat that day was oppressive, the kind that makes the air shimmer and distorts the world into something dreamlike and uncertain. The driving lesson had been routine: turn signals, parallel parking, the mechanical repetition of learning to navigate roads that all looked the same. But when the lesson ended and the students stepped out onto the pavement, something caught their eye. At first it seemed like trash, maybe a discarded piece of clothing someone had tossed from a car window. But there was something about the shape, something that demanded a closer look. And when they approached, the truth became horrifyingly clear. It was a puppy. Not just any puppy, but one so close to death that its tiny body had already begun to surrender. The fur was matted with dirt and something darker, blood perhaps, or the residue of days spent fighting a losing battle against dehydration and starvation. The eyes, when they opened for just a moment, held something that would haunt anyone who saw it. Not just pain, but a kind of knowing, as if this small creature understood it was at the very edge of existence. The rescuer knelt down, hands trembling, and reached for the water bottle they had brought for themselves. They tilted it gently, letting the water trickle toward the puppy's mouth. For a moment, nothing happened. The body remained still, lifeless. But then, with an effort that seemed to require every molecule of remaining strength, the puppy opened its eyes. Just a crack, just enough to acknowledge that someone had finally stopped, that someone finally saw. Then the eyes closed again, as if even that small gesture had depleted what little energy remained. The water continued to flow, slowly, carefully, and then something miraculous happened. The puppy's mouth opened. It was trying to drink. Despite everything, despite the body's near-complete shutdown, the will to live was still there, burning like an ember that refused to be extinguished. Each swallow was labored, each breath a conscious choice to continue existing. But there was a determination there that defied logic. This creature, weighing almost nothing, abandoned and left to die, was fighting back. But rescue is never as simple as good intentions. The tiny body, which had seemed incapable of movement, suddenly forced itself upward. The puppy stood, wobbling on legs that could barely support its weight. For a moment, there was a flash of something primal, something fierce. And then, just as quickly, the strength vanished. The puppy collapsed back onto the ground, eyes closing once more, surrendering again to the exhaustion that it claimed it. The rescuer felt a cold wave of panic. Was this it? Was this the moment when good intentions wouldn't be enough? They looked around frantically for something, anything that could help. A bag appeared. Where it came from didn't matter. What mattered was that it could become a makeshift carrier, a vessel to transport this fragile life to someone who might actually be able to save it.
The journey to the veterinary clinic was torture. An electric scooter is not designed for mercy missions. Every bump in the road felt like a potential death blow. The rescuer moved slowly, painfully slowly, trying to balance speed with gentleness, knowing that every second counted but that too much jostling could be the final straw. They cradled the bag against their body, feeling the tiny weight inside shift with each movement, wondering if each shift meant the puppy was still alive, or if it was just physics. the terrible physics of a body that had stopped fighting. The clinic finally appeared ahead, and the relief was overwhelming. But as they rushed inside, that relief transformed into something darker. The puppy had gone completely still. Not the stillness of sleep, but something more final. The rescuers' hands shook as they placed the bag on the examination table, unable to speak the question that was screaming in their mind. Am I too late? The veterinarian worked with practiced efficiency, hands moving over the tiny body with clinical precision. Minutes stretched into something elastic and terrible. And then finally, words. The puppy was alive. Just barely, but alive. And more than that, there were no contagious diseases, no parvovirus, no distemper, none of the deadly infections that so often claim strays. This wasn't a medical death sentence. This was just neglect, abandonment, the simple but brutal consequence of being unwanted. The vet's advice was straightforward. Take the puppy home, observe, see if it could recover with basic care. But something about that answer felt insufficient. The puppy was so weak, so close to the edge. Could basic care really be enough? The rescuer felt the weight of responsibility settling onto their shoulders like a physical thing. They were a student, not a pet owner. They didn't have resources, didn't have experience, didn't have any of the things that typically prepare someone for this moment. But they also couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after stopping. So they made a decision that would alter everything. They would try another hospital, get a second opinion, give this tiny creature every possible chance. The second veterinary clinic was different. From the moment they walked through the door, there was a sense of genuine care that went beyond duty. The vets here didn't just see a sick stray. They saw a life worth saving. After hearing the story, understanding the desperate circumstances, they moved quickly. The puppy needed nutrition immediately. Goat milk, gentle and easily digestible. But the puppy wasn't cooperating. Its mouth remained closed, its body too weak to even attempt the act of drinking. So the vet took a syringe, filled it with warm milk, and began the slow, painstaking process of feeding this tiny creature 1 milliliter at a time. It was intimate and heartbreaking watching a trained professional coax life back into something so small. And there was something else: diarrhea. The puppy's system was in crisis, unable to process what little it had consumed during its time on the street. An injection was prepared, administered with expert gentleness. And then the waiting began. Would the body respond? Would the treatment be enough? The rescuer stood there, watching, feeling simultaneously hopeful and terrified. When they returned home, something had shifted. The puppy, which had seemed like a corpse just hours before, could actually stand. Not for long and not steadily, but it could rise on its own legs. It was a small miracle, the kind that makes you believe in second chances. But feeding remained a challenge. The rescuer offered food, offered milk. Both were rejected. The puppy's eyes said no, even when its body desperately needed yes. So out came the syringe again, and the rescuer became nurse, coaxing nutrition into the tiny body bit by bit, wondering if this was sustainable, if they had the patience and time to keep this up. And then a breakthrough. Sausage. The puppy, offered a small piece of processed meat, suddenly showed interest, more than interest, enthusiasm. For the first time since the rescue, the puppy ate willingly, eagerly, with something that almost resembled joy. It was such a small thing, a preference for sausage over kibble, but it felt like a revelation. This creature had personality, had preferences, was becoming, right before their eyes, not just a rescued animal, but an individual. Day by day, the transformation continued. The fear in the puppy's eyes, that terrible, haunted look of an animal that had learned the world was cruel, began to fade. In its place came something new, curiosity, then confidence, then something that almost looked like happiness. The puppy started exploring, started interacting with the family, started claiming space in a home where it had every reason to expect rejection. The cardboard box that had served as its bed became too small, a physical representation of growth that was happening faster than seemed possible, and there were these small, perfect moments. The puppy sitting next to the rescuer's slippers, as if guarding them. The puppy following from room to room, unwilling to let its savior out of sight. At night, the tiny body would curl up as close as possible, seeking warmth and safety, and the presence of the one person who had stopped when everyone else drove past. A name emerged naturally, Minnie, because the puppy was impossibly small, barely larger than a beer bottle, a creature that seemed to exist in defiance of all physical laws about what it takes to survive. But happiness, the rescuer was learning, always comes with complications. They were a student, and summer wouldn't last forever. School was waiting, inevitable as seasons changing, and with it came the terrible question, What happens to Minnie when I have to leave? The family was loving but busy, unable to commit to the constant care a young puppy requires. And taking Minnie back to school wasn't possible. Dormitories don't accommodate new lives that need constant attention. So even as the puppy thrived, even as it transformed from dying creature to lively companion, there was this shadow hanging over everything. A deadline, an expiration date on what felt increasingly like the most important relationship of the rescuer's life. But for now, there was time. 9 days after the rescue, it was time for vaccinations. A normal, routine part of pet ownership that felt miraculous given where this journey had started. The rescuer, freshly licensed to drive, could take Minnie themselves. No more electric scooters, no more precarious balancing acts. Just a simple car ride to ensure this improbable survival story continued.
Minnie seemed to sense something was different about this trip. There was nervousness in the small body, a tension that suggested memory, perhaps of the previous hospital visit, perhaps of something deeper, some instinctual understanding that medical spaces meant discomfort. The eyes, usually so bright and curious, took on a worried cast. But when the moment came, when the needle approached, Minnie cooperated. The trust was there, stronger than the fear. The puppy had learned something profound, that humans could be kind, that pain sometimes preceded healing, that surrender wasn't always defeat. The vaccination was over quickly, and the reward was immediate. A pork chop, tender and savory, which Minnie devoured with an enthusiasm that made everyone in the room laugh. Even the bone wasn't safe, gripped in tiny jaws that refused to relinquish such treasure. It was joy, pure and uncomplicated, the kind that makes observers remember why they chose careers in animal care. But Minnie was revealing preferences that complicated the simple narrative of a grateful rescued puppy. Unlike other dogs, Minnie had no interest in traditional kibble. The dry, nutritionally balanced food that veterinarians recommend sat untouched in the bowl. What Minnie wanted was what the humans ate, real food with real flavors and real textures. When the rescuer sat down with fried chicken, Minnie's entire body language changed. There was yearning there, and strategy, and a kind of negotiation happening without words. The eyes locked onto the food with laser focus. The body positioned itself optimally for maximum guilt induction. And when it became clear that sharing wasn't happening, the barking began. Sharp, insistent, undeniably angry. Then came the silent treatment, Minnie turning away with what could only be described as wounded dignity. A small creature communicating complex emotions with perfect clarity. It was frustrating and endearing in equal measure. This evidence of personality, of will, of a being that had opinions about how things should be. 2 weeks after the rescue, Minnie was unrecognizable. The shy, melancholic creature that had barely clung to life was gone completely. In its place was a puppy that radiated energy, that approached the world with confidence and mischief. There was smartness there, a quick intelligence that learned patterns, anticipated actions, manipulated situations to optimal outcomes. And there was playfulness, the kind that turns every moment into potential adventure. Walks became celebrations, many practically vibrating with excitement at the sight of a leash, the promise of exploration, the opportunity to experience the world beyond walls that had protected but also confined. The transformation was so complete that it almost seemed like two different animals, the before and after of a story that people tell to prove miracles exist. The rescuer's phone filled with photographs, documentation of growth that seemed to happen in fast forward. Minnie at 1 week, Minnie at 2. Each image showing more life, more presence, more irreverable integration into a world that had almost lost this creature before it ever really lived. 2 months vanished like water through fingers, and with their passing came the reality that could no longer be ignored. School was starting. The rescuer had to return to a life that couldn't include Minnie, and the family, though loving, simply didn't have the capacity. Work schedules were unforgiving. The puppy required attention, training, care that didn't pause for convenience. So, the decision, painful and necessary, was made. Minnie needed a new home. Not just any home, but the right one. Someone who would love this dog the way the rescuer had learned to love it. Someone who would understand that Minnie wasn't just a pet, but a survivor with personality and history and specific needs. The search began with a kind of desperation, scrolling through adoption sites, vetting potential candidates, trying to find that perfect match that would make letting go feel less like betrayal. And eventually,
someone appeared. A woman whose messages conveyed genuine interest, whose questions showed real understanding, whose life seemed structured in a way that could accommodate Minnie's quirks and energy. The approval process moved forward, each step bringing closer a goodbye that the rescuer simultaneously wanted and dreaded. The day arrived with the weight of inevitability. The doctor came to the door, and when she saw Minnie, her face transformed with the kind of love that can't be faked. She knelt down and gathered the puppy into her arms, holding tight, murmuring words of greeting and promise. Minnie, for his part, seemed curious but calm, allowing the embrace without resistance. The rescuer watched this, feeling relief and heartbreak tangled together so tightly they became indistinguishable. This was the right choice. Minnie would be loved, would be cared for, would continue the improbable life that had begun on that roadside 2 months ago. But knowing something is right doesn't make it easy. As the adopter stood to leave, Minnie secure in her arms, the rescuer felt tears coming, hot and unwelcome and unstoppable. The summer had been defined by this small creature, every day shaped around its needs and growth and emerging personality. And now, in the space of minutes, that chapter was closing.
The door shut, and the silence that followed was crushing. The rescuer stood in the empty space where Minnie had lived, seeing ghost images of the puppy everywhere, by the slippers, in the cardboard box, following from room to room with devoted attention. The summer had been enriched beyond measure by this experience, transformed from forgettable break into something profound and lasting. It would be, the rescuer knew with certainty, one of those memories that shapes everything that comes after. The kind of experience that changes how you see the world, that makes you notice the small suffering you might have ignored before, that proves connection can happen in an instant when circumstances align. Finding Minnie outside that driving school hadn't been random. It felt like something else. Destiny, fate, whatever word captures the sense that some meetings are written somewhere beyond our understanding. And now came the waiting. Minnie would grow, would change, would become something other than the tiny creature that had needed rescuing. When they met again, if they met again, would there be recognition? Would Minnie remember the person who stopped, who poured water, who refused to drive past? Or would the memory fade the way most early memories do, leaving only the shape of emotion without specific attachment? The rescuer wanted to believe in lasting connection, in bonds that survive separation, but mostly they just hoped Minnie would be happy, would thrive in this new chapter, would continue to embody that fierce will to live that had been visible even when death seemed certain. The future stretched ahead, long and unknowable. And somewhere in that future, Minnie was running, playing, claiming space in another home the way he had claimed space in this one. The story, which had seemed complete, was actually just beginning. Because some rescues go both ways. Sometimes the creature you save changes you more than you change them, teaching lessons about resilience and second chances and the profound responsibility of witnessing suffering and choosing to act. That day on the roadside had been about saving a life, but looking back, the rescuer understood it had also been about discovering something essential about themselves, about who they wanted to be, about what mattered, about the kind of person who stops when everyone else drives past. And that knowledge, unlike the puppy, would never leave.